Yeah. So yeah, in the front.
So thank you everybody for coming to this talk, and for those who will hopefully be joining us in the future as well, once they've once we've distributed the recording. So today we have Liz Fuller from Save Britain's Heritage, which you can get involved with volunteering, which we'll probably talk about later as well. And yes, and there should just be a sort of general overview of what Save Britain's Heritage does and some examples of their work. So it should be a very interesting talk. So thank you. And over to you, Liz. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks. I'm Liz Fuller. I'm the Buildings at Risk Officer at Save Britain's Heritage, and I'm responsible for our Buildings at Risk Register, which I'll talk about in a little while. It's a very exciting time actually at Save, because we're 50 years this year and we've got a number of events we're organising to celebrate that. But we're also just about to get a new website and a new kind of slightly new look, which is very exciting for us and our profile. But the other thing that we're introducing at the same time is we're taking our register, which is currently only available to friends, we're taking it public. So we're really looking forward to how that lands, and like hoping that we're going to engage with a lot more people. So everyone will be able to see what's on the register, and we've got some new search functions, and so it would be great to see how that works. And I'd be really grateful if any of you are interested in looking at that when it comes into operation, which should be in it should be in a couple of weeks actually. So we'll see if that goes to plan. I'm going to cover some who we are and how we were formed, a couple of recent cases and ones that I think are particularly representative of what we do, and also talk about the Buildings at Risk Register, and very happy to answer questions at the end. But Save's was formed in 1975, so we've got our 50th year this year, and it was formed sort of off the back of a huge surge in interest in how to prevent the loss of historic buildings following the exhibition, a very influential exhibition at the V&A called The Destruction of the Country House. And you can see there the catalogue from that exhibition. And so it really, people were so shocked about the number of buildings that were being lost. There was a real swell of enthusiasm to ensure that our historic buildings were not lost. And so Save was sort of formed out of a number of different types of people, architectural historians, planners, journalists, architects, and other people involved in the built environment. And that kind of mixture of people, that interesting mixture and useful mixture of people, has continued. So we often have all sorts of people involved collaborating on campaigns. And it's one of the things that makes working for Save and Save's campaigns really effective. Here's an image of the exhibition as it was it looks charmingly low tech, but at the time it created a huge impression with these tumbling columns and all the pictures of the buildings that were being lost. And the catalogue was full of pictures of these incredible buildings that had been demolished from sort of 1900 onwards, but accelerating very much after the Second World War. And although a few of them were taken on by the National Trust, and maybe their own owners found some way of making enough business opportunities on the estate to keep them going, so many were lost. And turning the pages of that catalogue is really still quite shocking. But here's a country house where Save is a campaigning organisation primarily, and that's the main thing that we do. We don't kind of roll our sleeves up and get involved in actually doing the conservation work. However, there have been a couple of exceptions to that, and this house is one of them. It's Barlaston Hall, just outside Stoke-on-Trent. And in 1981, we were fighting against the owners of that building, which at the time was the Coal Board, because they wanted to demolish it. And it's a very fine 18th century house, really beautiful, and it had suffered quite a lot by being undermined by coal mining. And we were arguing that it could easily be saved. We had a surveyor who came and did some work for us, and in court we were making the case for this house, and the barrister on the other side turned round and said to Save, well, if you think this is so savable, this house, you buy it, we'll sell it to you for £1. And so not having been set up to do this kind of thing, they had to sort of scrabble around, decide whether they were going to take it on, and then did take it on, and stabilised the building and sold it to a private owner who converted it into a private house. It's since been sold and is now, I think it's an events venue. You can actually visit it. And it is a really, really beautiful house. I think we've got some shots here of kind of what state it was in. It had been allowed to really, really deteriorate. But even so, you could see from those black and white photos, you know, the detail there. And it has been really, really carefully restored. It's an absolutely beautiful job. And that is the kind of example that we like to show, because this is what you can do. And it also makes the point, I think, that yes, it might be quite difficult to put together a plan and to figure out the technical requirements of stabilizing a house or fixing what it is that's wrong with it before you can conserve it properly. But isn't it worth it? I mean, it is just much more than it is just so much more worth it, because you've created this and brought back to life this absolutely beautiful building. Save has campaigned on all sorts of different fronts. We have done quite a lot of work in railway buildings, and Off the Rails was a very early publication that we did. We were trying to save a number of different buildings, including it actually post-dated the loss of the Euston Arch, but it's such an emblematic piece of architecture to show what amazing architecture existed on the railway system. I have included it here. But we've campaigned for mills and all sorts of different building types, not just country houses. Here I must show you Marcus Binney, who is one of our founding members, was right there at the beginning, was involved in the exhibition about the country houses, and he has stayed involved with Save for a very long time. The house that you can see behind him is Piercefield House, which is an 18th century house by Sir John Soane. Obviously, not that much of it is surviving, but it does still stand, and there are sort of stables and so on next to it. It's privately owned, and it is really terrible that the private owners have done nothing over a period of decades to bring it back into use, and it's slowly deteriorated. But we continue to campaign for that house. And actually, also on the left of the screen, you can see Henrietta, who is our director. And here's the team. I just wanted to show us, because we are a small team, but we work with lots of people. We are helped by solicitors and by architects, by surveyors who go to buildings and give us their opinion about whether they can be saved or not. So we collaborate with we work with lots of community groups, very importantly, and you can see one group there. And you can also see Henrietta and a couple of other members of the team outside the High Court earlier in 2024, when we worked to do with the Marks and Spencer's campaign, which I'll come on to. But we're a very small team. I also want to introduce you particularly to Lydia, who is a Durham alumna, and she is our casework officer. And the only person that doesn't show up on the team there is our intern, Eve. We primarily campaign by commenting on planning applications and taking legal action where that's necessary. And we sort of stand apart from the other amenity societies, people like the Victorian Society, the Georgian Group, 20th Century Society, by if we think that the cause is appropriate and it is worth making the point, we will take legal action. And I'll talk a bit more about that when we look at the cases. We also do publications, issue reports, and do lots of press work. From the very beginning of Save, it's been very much about publicising the plight of the buildings, and not just taking the official avenues of writing to the chief exec of the local council or whoever, or the local MP, but actually putting the stories out there. So that's a very important part of what we do. There's a big journalistic element to the work. As part of our campaigning, we also commission alternative schemes, and we work with architects to come up with alternative schemes to demonstrate, to prove the point really that you can save a building, and look what an amazing thing you could do, how many benefits it would bring to the community. It's a very, very good way of doing that. We also increasingly are working in the sort of environmental and sustainability area, and including that in our arguments. It's much, much more environmentally friendly to use an existing building rather than to demolish and then start building all over again. And we also do buildings at risk work. Here are some of our publications. Something on mills, schools. We did a big publication on huge buildings which have been saved. Obviously, they can be very daunting to save, but there's a whole range of incredible buildings in there that have been saved. Here are a few more recent ones. We did a report on Manchester, boom not bust, and a really interesting one on department stores and how they can be reinvented in a new sort of retail environment. Here's a bit of a sample of our press attention that we get from everything sort of from the trade press, from the Architects Journal to the Daily Mail. We'll take that. We do radio and TV, and we're increasingly putting videos out so that we can get picked up by different platforms. Let me tell you a bit about the Welsh Streets case. This was a series of streets in Liverpool, and there's a bit of a backstory to this, because we had actually campaigned, before we actually got involved in this particular case, we'd campaigned for about 10 years against a government policy, actually a Labour government policy, known as Pathfinder. And Pathfinder was premised on the idea that the housing market, in certain areas, there was housing market failure. Basically, old buildings, old terraces were not worth very much money, and on that, and they were kind of run down. And the argument was that they were blighting areas, and a good way to sort of boost the economy would be to knock them all down and build new things. But it focused predominantly on Victorian and Edwardian terraced housing, and they proposed the demolition of 400,000 houses in areas like Manchester, the northeast, so Middlesbrough, Gateshead, Sunderland, in Liverpool and in Yorkshire. All areas were cleared. Residents moved out. Sometimes they didn't really want to be moved out. They wanted to stay in the communities in which they lived and had grown up in. And you ended up with these kind of zombie streets. And then they started being demolished. And we campaigned against this for a long time, obviously on the basis of the fact that they were eminently usable historic buildings. But there were lots and lots of other people who were against it, sort of in principle. This is not going to work. And in 2011, the plan was scrapped, but not before 30,000 houses have been demolished, in some cases leaving sort of open tracts of land. In the same year, in 2011, we bought a house in a set of streets in Liverpool called the Welsh Streets. We bought a house on Madryn Street, which you can see in that green box in the middle. And ours was number 21. Again, not something that we normally do, but on this occasion we did very cheaply buy this house and spend £3,000 doing it up to show what could be done with very, very little money. It was just up the street from the house in which Ringo Starr was born. A young couple moved in, which we found through a housing association, and it's sort of, they were about the only people on the streets who were actually living in these houses, but showing what could be done. But Liverpool actually, Liverpool City Council hung on to this idea that they could regenerate by knocking houses down, and they proposed to knock the Welsh Streets down. We obviously opposed that, and got it called in to a public inquiry, and there was a hearing in the summer of 2014. And while we waited for, that's another picture of how these streets looked, and it's quite shocking, really. While we waited for that inquiry, oh, there's Eric Pickles. I'm going to refer to him in a minute. Sorry, I wanted to get to this slide. We produced a publication to show how these houses could be reused and how the streets could look after they had been brought back into use, with people living there and a community thriving. And the architect who helped us with that report suggested how the buildings could be brought up to date and used for modern purposes. Anyway, when the results of the inquiry came back, it was found in our favour. Eric Pickles, who was the Secretary of State then, completely agreed with us about all the arguments about why these streets should not be demolished. But they were actually in a terrible state. They were standing all tinned up, and they even featured in an episode of Peaky Blinders as kind of representing, the deprivation, urban deprivation, and grim living up north. Actually, in Birmingham, I accept that it's not quite up north, but anyway. Same idea. And along came this organisation called Place First, who came up with a plan based on, how these streets looked when they were first built, and also, we'd like to think our suggestions about how they could be repurposed. And they took the streets on and they redeveloped them, and this is what they look like now. Absolutely beautiful, and incredibly popular place to live. Not very many things growing in that picture, but anyway. And they have, the other thing is, and this is a point we make a lot, is they have identity. People who live there are incredibly proud. They're the Welsh Streets. These are our streets. This is where we live. And it's a really powerful thing. And we went and visited and saw some of the work in progress as it was being converted. So I think a really powerful example of what you can achieve. Another example I just wanted to share with you is the campaigning that we did on Smithfield Market in London. We actually fought 2 public inquiries. The first one in 2004, when total demolition of the markets was proposed, and then later on in 2014, there was another proposal. I'll show you some pictures of them, which was to keep some of the facades, which were actually very lovely, but demolish completely the interiors and plonk a huge skyscraper in the middle, office block. And as you'll see, that the interiors are very fine, and we made the argument that they shouldn't be lost. The bit of Smithfield that they wanted to demolish or completely redevelop is not listed. In this old photograph, you can see in the background the meat market, which is still in operation as a meat market and is listed. The general market, which is in the foreground, isn't listed because during the war, it was damaged and rebuilt in a very sort of functional kind of way, but only damaged slightly. So, for example, you can see the tower, little corner tower with a turret in the foreground. Those did not survive, and they weren't reinstated when the building was restored. But the interiors are absolutely incredible, and incredibly evocative of the market trade that happened there, with these wrought iron columns, which are called Phoenix columns, which was sort of cutting edge technology when they were built. The architect was Horace Jones, who also built Tower Bridge. And they have these incredible levels of basement as well. So we fought 2 public inquiries. That was the first proposal where they demolished the whole thing. How horrendous is that? And we won that public inquiry. Well, it's just an aerial showing you the blue and the red is the bit that was proposed to be demolished in both cases. The blue there is the facades that they would have kept. Everything else would have gone, and that interior would have disappeared. And that was the second proposal. That's what the office block would have looked like. We campaigned in a number of different ways. In relation to the first proposal, we put out publications, and the Lady Gagas were work, it helped us to campaign in relation to the most recent public inquiry. And I think somebody somewhere decided that the meat outfit, which Lady Gaga wore at some point, was a kind of link to Smithfield's meat trade. I don't know. Anyway, it was very eye-catching, and we've used it a lot in our public sort of to publicise the campaign. We also proposed an alternative, to show how the incredible architecture could be brought back into use as a market and other offices and a combined use. And that shows these vast basements that could also be used. In the end, we won the inquiry, and as you, I'm sure, know, it's now being redeveloped, the site, as a location for the new London Museum. And that's due to finish in 2026. Here's some of the initial visualizations of what the museum might look like in the market. Prince Charles came and had a look at the work that was going on, and there's Marcus showing him how Save campaigned for the market. He was very interested in all the different elements. This is a picture from, we were really lucky, we had a tour around the site last year, and they were busily clearing areas so they could start constructing the museum. So it's really, really exciting, and it will be an incredible site, I think, when it's done. Let me tell you a little bit about Marks and Spencer's. This is our most recent and very, high profile, incredibly high profile campaign. We started work on this several years ago. It's been a very long running campaign, and basically Westminster Council gave Marks and Spencer's permission to demolish their headquarters store on Oxford Street. It's a big area, in order to rebuild, put a new store and new set of uses in there. There's going to be some retail and also office space and various other things. And the store is a very fine design, sort of very light Art Deco style, right next to Grade 2 star listed Selfridges, and it's built very much to be deferential, but also to match the Selfridges. The Marks and Spencer's store is not listed. It's also not in a conservation area, so that actually limited us in how we could make the case for this. But we did make the heritage case very strongly. You can still make the case even if a building is not listed. There you can see what it is, a large area. It's a huge piece of real estate there in the centre of London. We were successful in getting it called into a public planning inquiry. That's the new scheme there, which is a great big monolithic lump with a huge kind of jutting roof at the top, which nobody really likes very much. That's how it would look compared to the buildings at the moment on Oxford Street. Really quite a big block of a building. Because we didn't want to just make the heritage argument, we also called attention to, and it's the first time the two things have been taken together at public inquiry, to the argument that demolishing such a huge area in the centre of London and rebuilding it was massively environmentally damaging, and that a huge amount of carbon would be released in doing it. Now, Marks and Spencer's has a reputation, and it likes to trade on this reputation of being very environmentally friendly. And they did not like this at all, that we were calling this to people's attention. And part of the problem is that currently in the policy guidance for planning permission, there is a lot of emphasis on how efficient the new building that you're going to build is, but not enough emphasis on what the actual carbon cost of it is demolishing and also building the building in the first place. And of course we know that that's a carbon cost just like any other. And so there's a big thing that's being missed there. And this campaign really brought that to the fore and really emphasised that the construction industry has a responsibility to look at this quite critically, and the planning system. And a lot of architects were already behind this. And there's this campaign called Retrofit First. And we worked together with Architects Journal, who had been running that campaign, and very successfully got a lot of press attention. It was, like I say, it was a very high profile cause. And we managed to crowdfund to fund our costs for the public inquiry. So that was incredibly helpful, but it also demonstrated that people cared about this issue and they thought it was an important one to support. That's a picture of the public inquiry. It's a kind of quasi-judicial proceeding, very formal. It's public. Everybody can attend. And most of the people you can see sitting around the tables are Marks and Spencer's team. And then there are just kind of 2 or 3 people on the right-hand side. That's the SAVE team. So often at public inquiries and proceedings, you know, our team is tiny compared to the opposition, and you know, it can be a real exercise in holding your nerve. While we were waiting for the results of that inquiry, we managed to generate, we would like to think, constructive publicity by working with the Architects Journal to run a campaign called Restore, where we invited people to come up with ideas about how the building could be repurposed and reinvented and reimagined for the new era of retail. And so we had this brilliant day, it's called a charrette, where people come with their designs and compete and discuss their alternative proposals to see which one people think is the best and what elements would be most successful. So really creative and really sort of ideas-based exercise, which again was generated a lot of really good publicity, amazing images, and you know, enabled us to meet new people in the architecture world. We did, however, lose the public inquiry. It was announced just before Christmas, and it was very much expected. It wasn't a shock. We knew what was going to happen. Although initially the Secretary of State found in our favour Michael Gove, it was before the change of government. Marks and Spencer challenged that. We had to go to court, and they called into question some of the bases on which he reached that decision. And so it had to go back to the Secretary of State, which by this time was a new person, Margaret Rayner. We were very much, from that point on, we were very much expecting that it wouldn't go our way. And with the, you know, new emphasis on growth agenda and so on, we didn't think it was very likely that it would be held up. And so Marks and Spencer's now have permission to completely demolish that building and build their new one. But it is a bit of a noble defeat, we feel, because so much discussion has been generated around the really important issues. I'm only going to quickly just talk about a smaller case. We don't just do big cases. We do, you know, lots and lots of writing about small cases and commenting on planning applications. And we also do smaller campaigns. So this is a site in Devon called Bradley Lane Mills, and we made the case that it shouldn't be demolished to build a faceless housing estate that you can see there, but it should be redeveloped, saving the industrial character, which is very much part of the town's history and the reason why it sort of existed and flourished, and how it could be brought back into this really lovely neighbourhood and redeveloped that way instead. I'm sorry to say that actually that is also in the process of being demolished, but I think that it shows exactly how we put together a campaign, even on a smaller scale. So let me just show you the buildings at risk. This is obviously what I do, the buildings at risk register. We have 1,400 or 1,500 buildings all around the country on the register. It's been going for 35 years. We this is intended to focus on buildings which are at risk, not because somebody's put in a planning application to demolish them or redevelop them, but because they're just empty and they're just standing there without a use, mouldering away. So we want to shine a light on that, raise people's awareness of why that's important, what these buildings mean to them, and hopefully that way encourage people to maintain their buildings and to reuse them and find a new use for them. And we use it as a platform for campaigning and for advocating to them, writing to the local authority, writing to owners, and creating attention. We also do it to help community groups who might be campaigning for those buildings as well. It kind of gives them a little bit of a basis to say, look, Save has said this building's worth looking at and needs to be saved. So, and we like to try and work together with community groups. Anybody can nominate buildings at any time, and we have normally we just add buildings in one go once a year, but we do actually also add buildings at other times as well. And I think increasingly we will just, as soon as we get nominations, we will write them up, research them and put them on the register. Each of the entries is updated annually, and this is where we've had incredible help, and we're so grateful for that. Always looking for new volunteers. So please, if you've got any spare time you might not have between your studies, but if you do, we really appreciate everybody's help, whether to update, whether to nominate. And so, yeah, we'd love you to get involved. This is the launch of the buildings that we added to the register in 2024. And I've included there on the right-hand side some of the buildings that were nominated in Durham and nearby. And actually they've generated a huge amount of interest, particularly the old fulling mill. So really grateful that you brought that to our attention. And there's just a little sample of, the vast range of buildings, brilliant buildings, like the library in Stoke, which is absolutely brilliant. The modern, or more modern building in Manchester, which was built as a college of further education, which is, the famous Toast Rack building, it's called, which is actually suffering with concrete issues. It's quite a tricky case. And then lots of rural buildings, which are absolutely charming, that don't have a use. If there's the Lady Gagas again, obviously, because they are our most exciting and glamorous image of campaigning. We're always really encouraging people to join as friends and saviours, but actually the main thing that we'd like people to do now is to sign up to our mailing list and just follow the story. We put out a monthly bulletin, but we also, if we're making a press release on a particular thing we're campaigning on, we put those out as well. So if you sign up you can do that on our website, go and sign up. And tell me about buildings at risk. I'd be really, really happy to answer any questions or that you think either you're interested in or you think other people who might see the video might be interested in.
No, yeah, that was a really interesting talk. Thanks for giving that. I think yeah, I wasn't really aware of just the sheer diversity of things that you've been involved in, and everything from M&S down to sort of small farmhouses. So I think it's really interesting to hear about the different, and as you said, not all of them have been successful. Some of them have been successful, but yeah, it's really interesting to see how even with as a small team as you have, you've been able to have so much an impact. So yeah, in terms of questions, yeah, I think so where is the majority? Do you have like a particular focus in terms of the majority of work, or is it kind of spreads throughout the UK?
No, it's a good question, because I think when I first joined Save, it was about 10 years ago, I think there was a great concern that people thought we were very south and London centric, and that is really not the case at all. And I hope that, although I have talked about Smithfield, which is literally around the corner from here, here. We work all over the country with all kinds of buildings, and yeah, we're not based in one area. We've been doing a lot of work in Scotland recently, and Lydia, who's our caseworker, is from Northern Ireland, and she's been instrumental in us adding buildings to the register that are in Northern Ireland, and also bringing to our attention sort of the issues there. And it's always really interesting to sort of compare and contrast. We do work in Wales, we all over the country.
Alex, any questions?
Well, we say, are there any particular areas of priority in terms of the stock you want to preserve, or is it absolutely everything you can?
So yes, one of our audience said, are there particular areas of the country that you think deserve priority, or perhaps not deserve, but demands perhaps more attention, or is it more of a case of just addressing everything as it arises?
Well, it is actually a problem because I wouldn't say we have a geographical focus. I mean, sometimes, for example, the Manchester report that we did because we had funding from a particular foundation who wanted us to highlight that area. And so that's what we did. But normally, you know, things come into us and we read about them and we have to assess, and it's one of the most difficult things, really. Because we're totally independent, so it's sort of on the one hand it's a blessing to be up to us. On the other hand, from a strategic point of view, we need to try and find cases which highlight important issues and which we think that we're in a good position to fight, and that, you know, ideally we have a good chance of winning, although that's not everything. But so it is actually one of the most difficult things in terms of campaigning. You know, which ones are we going to, because we're such a small team, which ones are we going to put our resources into? Because at the same time, we want to keep going with the smaller things, that the sort of regular things that we're receiving all the time from people wanting help with smaller cases, and just, you know, for us to object to planning applications and so on. So it's a balancing act, and it is an act, you know, it is a question of prioritization. So we have to try and keep ahead of, you know, developments in government policy, in planning, you know, and what's happening with the economy, and try and listen to what other organisations are saying, what the architects profession is saying, you know, so that we can kind of understand what things are important now.
Yeah, that's was that answer everything? Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, my kind of interest are kind of in terms of heritage is was the coast, maritime archaeology, that sort of things. I was wondering if you have any sort of high profile, maybe not maritime, but kind of coastal cases, dockyards, things like that. Definitely.
That's yeah, absolutely. We have done work in. I mean, actually, there's one boat house. That's not the right word. Shed, huge warehouse in Portsmouth, in the docks at Portsmouth, you know, near the Mary Rose, which we saved, and it's great. It was Grade 2 star listed, and there's actually another Grade 2 star listed one in Sheerness that's on the register, and you know, obviously they're very big structures, and they're often not that robust because they were built out of light materials, but they are big. And the one in Portsmouth was saved, Boathouse 4, and it has been returned to making boats, but of different sizes, so it's sort of different operations going on within the same building. That's an example. There are many examples. Portsmouth docks, Royal Docks, is somewhere where we've done quite a bit of work in the past. Unbelievably, really, you wouldn't think that would, but because it was ex-MOD buildings, and still some of it is MOD, I think, so that it's not as straightforward as it might be. But yeah, there are lots and lots of coastal sites, and actually I did a talk on very originally titled, I thought, called Postcards from the Edge, which is all about coastal buildings that are on the Buildings at Risk Register. And there's just this amazing variety of buildings there. Brilliant Lido in Margate, kind of, you know, sort of, there's a watchtower on the beach in Wales. Can't remember exactly where in Wales it is now, but a real variety of buildings and interest.
Yeah, that's Yeah, that's. Yeah, I'm kind of surprising how much just the variety of things and just how much just. I can definitely think of a few buildings, at least near me where I live, that definitely could probably. They might be on the list already, but I might have a look and see.
Oh,
if they're-
please. Yeah. It makes my day when people say that. And because
Yeah.
it's only if you live somewhere that you really know, you really have a
Yeah.
sense of, these buildings. So that would be fantastic. And if you ever need any, and if anybody on the course ever needs any examples of buildings, the register is a real resource for that. If you look at case studies or whatever, there's often kind of links to either the planning applications or background information about them as well.
Yeah, thanks. Any other questions? I think that's. You've got to say something. I think that's everyone's got had their questions.
They're
answered.
great
So,
questions.
Yeah, I wish I could. Yeah, I'll have a look whether that building's on the register. So in terms of how do we sign up to the monthly mailing lists?
Yes, if you go to our website, I think it comes up when you go onto it, but I think you can also I think there's I don't know, I think there's a button that says publications, and I think probably if you go there you'll find it. The other place is actually in my footer in my email. There's a link there. You can sign up through that link. But in terms of looking at the register, hang on for a few weeks and then you can just have a look for free.
Yes.
Because otherwise you have to be a friend. But although I can give you free access if you want it. Now I've got passwords and things, but
yeah, I'm happy to wait and see what. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing. I'll probably just spend a few hours just searching through, see what's near me. But
that would be brilliant. Yeah. We welcome people's interest and corrections and comments and additions.
Right, I think that's everything for us. Alex, do you want to? Slide.
Thank you. I should probably take this off recording now. It's not.